Hello. On this unit, we will be looking at the urinary system. First, we will go over the parts of the urinary system, and then we will focus on nephron as a especially important structure. When we think of why to study urinary system, we find ourselves once again looking at this slide which you have seen earlier. So we saw how the various systems were interlinked, working together to enable us to turn sugars into energy and then getting rid of waste products that resulted from this process. In this case, it will be the excess hydrogen. And urinary system played a key role in this. So we see that the urinary system is composed of certain key parts. And the one that has a huge range of functions is kidneys. And we will spend quite some time looking at their functions and how they work in a fair bit of detail. For our purposes for now, we will note that as a result of many of their functions, kidneys produce urine. We will also talk about ureters, which transport this urine from the kidneys to the next structure called urinary bladder. And while there has been 2 kidneys and 2 ureters, we will only have 1 urinary bladder. And as for the urinary bladder, probably one of the simpler ways to describe it is that it is just a storage site where the urine is kept until a time comes to release and excrete it from the body. And this connection from the urinary bladder to the outside world is through urethra. And of course, we have one of those. The length of urethra varies a fair bit between sexes, and we will consider some of its consequences later. But for now, this is a good overview of the urinary system for our purposes, isn't it? So, as I said, the kidneys have a huge range of functions. At large, we can consider this vast range of tasks as a result of kidneys' role in filtering the blood. And this, in turn, then results in several jobs that the kidneys take care of. For example, of some of the most important, the kidneys regulate the water volume and the total solute concentration in water. In addition, they take care of regulating ion concentrations in the fluid outside the cells, known as ECF, extracellular fluid. In addition, kidneys play a crucial role in ensuring the maintenance of long-term acid-base balance. We discussed this in our introductory biology classes, and if you have forgotten this, I will add a link to the end of this video. Furthermore, kidneys play a key role in excretion of metabolic wastes, toxins, and drugs. So when you go out for a night out on a town, your kidneys won't be resting while you are. A couple of other important things that kidneys do that definitely need to be highlighted are regulation of blood pressure via erythropoietin and regulation of red blood cell production via renin. And I added this too, as I do not want to forget the important role of kidneys in activating vitamin D. Also, if needed, the kidneys will carry out gluconeogenesis. So, this is quite a list and only makes a start of conveying the many functions of kidneys. So while these are the ones that I picked based on my view of that these are the most important ones, but there are many others. But let's take a step back from the list of functions and cover a bit of gross anatomy of the kidneys. So kidneys are often described as having a shape that resembles the shape of a bean. Of course bigger, but similar in shape. In fact, I believe that typically an adult kidney is in size something like 12 centimeters long, 6 centimeters wide, and 3 centimeters thick. So that gives you an idea of the size. And this shape of being gives a rise to a concave medial surface where we will find renal hilum. Internally at this area, we have renal sinus inside the kidney, and I think that it is shown even in this figure that I included. The reason why I wanted to highlight this is that it is at the hilum where ureters, renal blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves enter and exit to the kidney. Of course, a lateral surface then is convex. And of course, I want to mention that they are reddish brown in color. One final point that I really want to make of what I have highlighted here is that the kidneys appear on gross anatomy level to have a smooth surface. This is because they are enclosed in a fibrous renal capsule. And the kidneys are anchored to the peritoneum and abdominal wall by fascia. Thinking of dissecting a kidney, these are often surrounded by a capsule of internal fat which protects these. What I just said about anchoring the kidney gives us also a clue of kidney's location. They are much further back towards your back than people often think, so they are retroperitoneal organs, behind the peritoneum. And we talked about the peritoneum in our video of the abdominal organs. I will add a link to that as well to the end of this video. We also notice that when comparing the left and right kidney, we notice that the left kidney is typically higher while the right one is lower. Why would this be the case? Can you propose an explanation based on all that you know about the human body? Well, the answer is, of course, in the fact that the liver is largely located on the right side above the kidney, and therefore it ends up being a little lower. And this leads us to look just briefly at one clinical condition. In renal ptosis, one or both of the kidneys drop lower than normal. And this may result from the loss of fatty tissue capsule that surrounds the kidneys and holds them in their normal position. This can be sometimes seen as a consequence of someone dropping weight very fast. The consequences can be quite problematic. As a result, the ureter may become kinked, causing the urine to back up and exert pressure on the kidney tissue. And let's consider this a little. This backing up of the urine can cause severe damage to the kidney, leading to tissue death and eventually to renal failure. Now, let's look at the internal anatomy of the kidneys. There are three main regions that we want to note. Cortex is the granular appearing superficial region. Medulla then is deep to this and composed of cone-shaped medullary pyramids. These are sometimes called also as renal pyramids, so don't let that confuse you if you see these terms sometimes being used interchangeably. Notice on this diagram how the broad base of this pyramid faces cortex, while the tip of the pyramid, known as papilla, points internally. These renal pyramids are separated by renal columns, which are inwards expansions of the cortical tissue. And then one more term that we need to know, lobe refers to the medullary pyramid and its surrounding cortical tissue. So, if we try to put these structures together from this and our earlier slides, there is a nice list of flow of urine there for you too. Now, let's shift our focus on a much smaller scale, a structure called nephron. These are functional and structural units of the kidney and form the urine. In a healthy adult, we would typically see somewhere about 0.8 to 1.5 million nephrons per kidney. And using this diagram, let's review the main parts of a nephron. So first of all, we have blood coming into and leaving the nephron. So the vessel bringing the blood is known as an afferent and the one leaving efferent. Please note that there is no really loss or gain of hemoglobin here. I just included the color to highlight the difference with these. And with the nephron, this blood vessel makes a capillary bed known as glomerulus. This is a tuft of capillaries composed of fenestrated endothelium with highly porous capillaries. And the Bowman's capsule, or sometimes it is called glomerular capsule, is a cup-like sac around this. This encloses the glomerulus inside it. And this filtration process produces something called filtrate. Then, from the Bowman's capsule, we have a proximal convoluted tubule. Note the name, proximal. This is closer to the renal capsule. And now, we have a nephron loop, which is sometimes also known as a loop of Henle. This is a U-shaped structure that consists of two limbs, descending and ascending limb. During the descending limb, there is some reabsorption, so some of the material that we have taken into the nephron now gets returned back to the blood. And during ascending limb, some of the secretion happens, meaning that some content from the blood gets put back into the nephron. And now we can look at the distal convoluted tubule. Here we are further away from the renal capsule, and the wall structure of this area becomes especially important when certain hormones play a role. But we will have a look at that a little later. The final structure from here that I want to highlight is collecting duct. This is where now urine is excreted from the nephron. So I know that it was a lot of terms, but really when we put it all together, it makes it more manageable, I think. And now I want to draw our attention to these arrows as for fluid movement that takes place at each site. So I have mentioned these just briefly earlier, but when we put it all together, we notice that there's a lot of movement to and out from the nephron. So this is why nephron is so delicately and elegantly designed structure. And now we get to the clinical stuff as it relates to the nephron. Glomerular filtration rate is used in clinical practice to quantify how much blood flows through the glomeruli in a minute. Basically what it tells us is that how well the kidneys are working. And in a medical field, you will often see this abbreviated as GFR. Now, I mentioned earlier that there is a hormone that I need to introduce here. ADH, an abbreviation which stands to Anti-diuretic Hormone, is a hormone that reduces the amount of urine produced by the nephrons. And it acts on the distal convoluted tubule especially. The presence of the ADH changes the wall of distal convoluted tubule more permeable, which results in more fluid being recovered back to the circulation from the nephron. So with that, we are going to wrap up our discussion on the kidney. In the next video, we will briefly look at other parts of the urinary system.